Hello guys, this is Miss Scotus. Last week we went over the formula for the active and the passive voice, and hopefully you got the chance to practice identifying the active and the passive voice when working on the worksheet. Now, this week, I'd like to offer you just a few additional notes on the active and the passive voice. So this will be part 2 of our active and passive voice lessons, or active and passive voice, the sequel. So first, before we launch into things fully here, let's review the formulas for the active and passive voice just one more time. So we remember that in a sentence written in the active voice, we will have the subject, which is the agent or the actor, the thing performing the action, then the verb, and then the direct object, the thing that is receiving the action. And in our example sentence here, we see just that. We have the student, the person performing the action, coming first. Then we have our verb, which is ate. And then we have the thing receiving the action, that poor gummy worm that is being eaten. By contrast, with the passive voice, we start out with the subject being not the thing that is performing the action, but rather the thing that is receiving the action. Then we include a conjugated form of the verb to be. Then we have the past participle of the verb. Then the word by, and then finally the agent or actor, the thing that is performing the action. So if we apply that formula to our original sentence then, we'd have first the gummy worm, the thing that is receiving the action, then the words was eaten, and then finally by the student, the person or thing performing the action, now comes at the end of the sentence. All right, now that we have gone through that brief recap of the passive voice formula, I want to make an additional point clear. When writing a sentence in the passive voice, you can actually cut out the by plus the agent or actor from that formula. So for example, in the sentence, the gummy worm was eaten by the student, you can cut out the last part, by the student, and be left with this sentence, the gummy worm was eaten. This is still a complete sentence, and it is still technically written in the passive voice. So just remember then that the last part of the passive voice formula, the by plus the agent or actor, is technically an optional part of the formula, and therefore it can be omitted. Obviously, it adds extra information and helpful information to the sentence because it tells us who or what performed the action, but it is not necessary to form a complete sentence in the passive voice. The gummy worm was eaten is still a complete sentence. Alright, here I have just a few more examples of that same idea for you. So you might have the passive voice sentence, the event was canceled by the event coordinator. And you will note that you could always cut out that last piece, by the event coordinator, and it still reads as a complete sentence. The event was canceled. Same with the text message was erased by my friend. You could simply say the text message was erased, and you still have a complete sentence written in the passive voice. Okay, now this is something that you will need to keep in mind when you are working on your worksheet. In your worksheet, you will have to transform certain sentences from the passive voice to the active voice, and some of these sentences will not include the last part of the passive voice formula, that by plus agent or actor. When transforming these sentences into the active voice then, you will need to add your own agent or actor to be the new subject of your sentence. So for example, if we were to transform the passive sentence, the cake was eaten, into the active voice, we'd first need to decide on who actually ate the cake. The cake was eaten by whom? You could choose any actor or agent here that you want, but I'm going to choose Jeff. So if we were to complete our passive voice formula, the full passive voice formula sentence would read, the cake was eaten by Jeff. And then, when we transform that sentence into the active voice, we would have Jeff ate the cake. The same applies to the next sentence here. Spanish is spoken in Spain. This sentence is also written in the passive voice, and it does not include the last piece of the formula, the by plus an agent or actor. Spanish is spoken by whom in Spain? Well, presumably it's spoken by many people in Spain. So if we were to write our sentence out in the completed passive voice formula, we would have Spanish is spoken by many people in Spain. And then, if we were to transform it into the active voice, we would say many people speak Spanish in Spain. All right, now that we have gone through all of the nitty-gritties about the passive voice, you may be wondering, well, Miss Scotus, why are we even bothering to learn about the passive versus the active voice? What good is it to know this? Well, I'll tell you. Understanding the difference between the passive and the active voice can be very helpful in your writing because generally eliminating the passive voice from your writing makes it sound stronger, makes it sound more active. Just take a look at those two sentences below. The first one is written in the passive voice, and it sounds really clunky. The paper will be written by me, and it will be turned in by me by tonight. Now just compare that with the sentence below that, written in the active voice. I will write the paper and turn it in by tonight. Eliminating the passive structure immediately makes the sentence sound much cleaner and crisper. This is something that I would like you to be looking at and thinking about in your own writing. Do you sometimes subconsciously utilize the passive voice? If so, that's something that you probably want to try to eliminate as much as possible in order to create a stronger, cleaner, more concise writing style. Alright, before we conclude here, I do want to make one final note. Even though generally writing in the active voice makes for stronger and better sentences, sometimes it can, in fact, be preferable to write certain sentences in the passive voice. After all, the passive voice wouldn't exist if it was always bad to use. It does have a purpose, but it simply has to be used sparingly. For example, passive voice sentences are often used well when talking about certain things within politics. Here I have several examples. The new law was passed, Abraham Lincoln was elected, President Andrew Johnson was impeached. You'll notice that all of these sentences are in the passive voice, and I would argue that it would be awkward to phrase them in the active voice. Just take a look at the second sentence, for example. If we were to phrase that sentence in the active voice, we would say, the people elected Abraham Lincoln as president. Once we do that, once we phrase that sentence in the active voice, we suddenly have taken the emphasis off of Abraham Lincoln and have placed it on the people. The people elected Abraham Lincoln president. Now, if you wanted to place the emphasis on the people in that sentence, wording it in the active voice would be just fine. However, if you really wanted to place the emphasis on Abraham Lincoln and the fact that he was elected president, then it would make sense to list his name first as the subject and phrase the sentence in the passive voice. Abraham Lincoln was elected. Alright, so long story short here, as a general rule, it is usually advisable to avoid the passive voice in writing. However, in certain rare instances, when you want to place the emphasis upon the thing that is being acted upon, you might want to utilize the passive voice so that the thing that is being acted upon becomes the main subject and thus the main focus of the sentence. Alright, now that we have gone through those details on the active and passive voice, go ahead and start working on that worksheet. Have a good day, guys.